He had always dreamed of having a quiet place of his own, somewhere he could escape from the noise of life and enjoy a little peace. When he finally bought the house with the lake attached to it, it felt like a dream come true. The property wasn't grand like something you would see in magazines, but to him it was perfect. The lake sparkled in the sunlight, surrounded by tall trees that swayed with the wind, and it gave him the sense that nature itself was embracing him. Every morning he would wake up, open his back door, and see the calm water waiting for him. He loved sitting by it with a cup of coffee, watching the ripples spread slowly across the surface. Sometimes ducks would land, creating small waves before floating peacefully. Other times, fish would jump up, breaking the silence with a splash. Before disappearing again, the lake wasn't just water to him. It was the reward for years of hard work, of saving, of dreaming. He remembered the day the realtor showed him the property. The house was decent, but the lake was what captured his heart. As soon as he saw it, he knew this was his place. He imagined long afternoons fishing, evenings sitting with friends around a small fire, or even just lying on the grass alone, thinking about life. It wasn't just property on paper, it was part of him now, and he felt proud every time he looked at it. The first few weeks living there were everything he hoped for. He would return from work, put down his bag, and walk straight to the water's edge. Sometimes he brought a fishing rod and spent hours waiting patiently, whether he caught anything or not. Other times, he just sat there, breathing in the fresh air, letting the stress of the day fade away. It was peaceful in a way that he had never experienced before. For years, he had lived in noisy apartments and crowded neighborhoods. But now, at last, he had found a corner of the world that truly felt like his. But peace never lasts long when people like Karen live nearby. At first, he didn't even notice she was just another face in the neighborhood, waving half-heartedly when he passed by in his car. He thought nothing of it. He was too busy settling into his new home and enjoying his lake. But soon he began to realize that his lake seemed to attract more attention than he expected. It started small. One Saturday morning while he was fishing, he noticed Karen walking down the path with her little dog. She smiled in a way that felt forced and asked, "Beautiful lake you've got here. We've all been enjoying it for years." At her a little confused, because the realtor had been very clear. The lake belonged to his property alone. He brushed it off politely, telling her he had just moved in and was happy to finally have a place to relax. Karen nodded, but her tone carried a strange familiarity, as if she believed the lake was partly hers. He didn't say much, thinking maybe it was just friendly small talk, but then it happened again. The next weekend, when he walked outside with his fishing rod, he saw Karen and two kids splashing in the water. They had set up towels on the grass and were laughing loudly, treating the lake as if it were a public park. His heart sank. He felt uncomfortable but wasn't sure what to do. He didn't want to start a fight with his neighbors so soon after moving in. He tried to ignore it, setting his chair a little distance away and focusing on his fishing line. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. This was supposed to be his sanctuary, his private place, and now strangers were treating it like their own. The pattern continued. Sometimes he would come home to find Karen's family at the lake, sometimes even bringing guests. They left snack wrappers, soda cans, and toys behind, little reminders that they had been there. The lake was losing the peaceful charm that had drawn him to it. Instead of quiet mornings, he now had to listen to splashing, shouting, and barking. Dogs. It hurt him more than he expected. He had worked so hard to buy this property, to have a place where he could finally feel at peace. And now it seemed like that dream was slipping away. He tried to stay patient. He reminded himself that maybe they just didn't realize the lake was private. Maybe they thought it was community property because the previous owner never said anything. But deep down he knew this wasn't right. The deed in his hand made it clear the lake was his, every inch of it. And yet, didn't feel that way when Karen marched around with her beach towels and coolers. Every time he saw her near the water, his chest tightened with frustration. He wanted to tell her to stop, to pack her things and leave, but he also worried about causing bad blood in the neighborhood. It was new there after all. He didn't want to be known as the rude outsider who shouted at everyone. Still, he couldn't ignore the knot in his stomach. He had waited years for this lake. It wasn't fair for someone else to take it over at night. He would sit by his window, looking out at the moonlit water, wondering what he should do. He loved this place more than anything, but already he felt like he was losing control of it. The lake was his pride and joy, his dream turned into reality. And yet it was slipping away into the hands of someone who didn't respect boundaries. He told himself that sooner or later, he would have to act. But for now, he just watched, holding on to the piece of the lake whenever he could. Trying to enjoy the little moments before Karen showed up again, the days passed and his attachment to the lake only grew stronger. He would run his fingers across the water, feeling its cool touch, as though it reassured him that it still belonged to him, no matter what others thought. Sometimes he even spoke softly to himself, saying, "This is mine. I worked for this. No one can take it away." But deep inside, he already knew someone was trying to. He just didn't know yet how far Karen would go or how much he would have to fight to keep what was rightfully his. It didn't take long before the real problem showed itself clearly. One sunny afternoon, he walked outside with a folding chair and his fishing rod, ready to spend a few hours enjoying the calmness of his lake. But what he saw made his heart sink again. Karen was already there, not just with her kids this time, but with two other adults he had never seen before. They had brought coolers, snacks, and even a portable speaker blasting loud music. The kids were screaming and splashing in the water, while the adults sat comfortably on chairs as if it was their personal vacation spot. For a moment, he stood frozen, watching them laugh and shout, and he felt the piece of his property breaking into pieces. He had been patient for weeks, telling himself not to make enemies, but this was too much. The lake was not a park, not a community pool, and certainly not a public playground. It was his private property, and now it looked like strangers were treating it like their weekend getaway. He took a deep breath, walked closer, and tried to keep his voice steady. "Excuse me," he said politely. "This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you not to bring guests here." Karen turned her head, her sunglasses sliding down her nose, and gave him a sharp look. "What do you mean? We've always used this lake. Everyone in the neighborhood has. The last owner never said a word. Can't just take it away from us now." He blinked, almost unable to believe her words. He calmly explained, "I understand if you thought it was for everyone before, but it's actually part of my property. I have the deed. The realtor made it very clear it belongs to me." Karen scoffed loudly, as if he had just told her the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. She stood up and put her hands on her hips. "Look, I don't care what papers you think you have. This lake has been enjoyed by the community for years. You moving in doesn't change that. The HOA rules say that shared spaces are for everyone, and this lake is part of our community." He felt his patience thinning. Knew the truth. He had spent hours reading every line of the property documents before buying the place. The lake was not shared space, not community land. It was his. He tried again, speaking as calmly as possible. "I've checked everything. The HOA doesn't own this lake, and neither does the community. It's fully within my property line. I'm not trying to be rude, but this isn't a public spot. You're trespassing." Karen's friends exchanged awkward looks, but Karen herself didn't back down. She laughed in that mocking way only certain people can. "Trespassing? Are you serious? You think calling it that will scare us? This isn't just your lake. You bought a house, not an entire lifestyle. Stop acting like you're the king of the neighborhood." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because of the arrogance dripping from them. He clenched his fists in his pockets, trying to hold back his anger. He had worked for years to finally afford this home, to finally have this dream. And now she was treating him like a thief who had stolen something from her. He tried one last time to reason with her. "Look, I don't want to fight, but I'm asking you nicely. Please stop bringing people here. I've noticed trash left behind, and this place is meant to be private. I need you to respect that." Karen rolled her eyes, grabbing her drink. "From the cooler, respect? You're the one who doesn't respect this neighborhood. You moved in and suddenly think you own everything. You're making enemies, and trust me, you don't want that. Everyone knows me here. People trust me. If you keep this up, you're going to regret it." The threat was clear. She wasn't going to stop, and she was ready to make life miserable for him. He felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could someone be so bold, so shameless, when the law and the facts were completely against them? He wanted to argue more, but he knew nothing he said would change her mind. The rest of that day was ruined. He tried to fish, but the noise of splashing and music destroyed any sense of calm. He packed up early, went inside his house, and watched from the window as they laughed like they owned the place. By evening, when they finally left, the grass was littered with chip bags and soda cans. He walked outside to clean it up, his chest heavy with anger. Each piece of trash felt like a reminder of how little Karen cared about his rights. That night, he pulled out the property documents again and studied them carefully under the lamp. Every line confirmed what he already knew. The lake, the land surrounding it, everything was listed clearly under his ownership. There was no mention of shared rights, no clause about the HOA. He wasn't imagining this. Legally, he was completely in the right. But knowing that didn't solve the real problem, Karen didn't believe in facts. She believed in control. Next day, he decided to try a softer approach. When he saw Karen walking her dog by the street, he greeted her and said, "Hey, can we talk for a moment? I just want to clear the air about the lake." She stopped, adjusted her sunglasses, and looked at him with that same dismissive smirk. "What now? Are you going to show me your precious papers again?" Kept his voice calm, refusing to get pulled into her sarcasm. "I just want us to be good neighbors. I'm not trying to upset you or anyone else, but I have to protect my property. The lake is important to me. Please, if you want to enjoy it, ask me first. Don't just assume you can bring people whenever." "You want?" Karen laughed loudly, shaking her head. "Listen, you don't get it. I don't need your permission. This lake belongs to all of us, no matter what you say. You're the one causing drama. And trust me, everyone in the neighborhood will hear about how selfish you are." He realized then that talking to her was useless. Karen had made up her mind. No amount of explanation, no amount of proof was ever going to convince her. She didn't care about the truth, she only cared about winning. And in her eyes, he was the enemy who had dared to draw a line she didn't like. Over the next week, things got worse. Every time he looked outside, it seemed like Karen or her kids were at the lake. Sometimes they even came when he wasn't home, leaving behind trash for him to clean up later. Once he found their dog had dug holes near the water. Another time he discovered broken beer bottles scattered in the grass, dangerous shards glittering in the sunlight. He knew it was only a matter of time before something had to change. His patience, once steady, was reaching its limit. He had been polite, he had explained. He had shown respect even when she didn't deserve it. But nothing worked. Karen wasn't going to stop, not because she believed she was right, but because she enjoyed the power of taking what wasn't hers. He stood on his porch one evening, watching the sunset over the lake, and his decision finally hardened inside. Enough was enough. He wasn't going to let anyone, especially Karen, steal the peace he had worked so hard for. She might shout, she might threaten, but he wasn't going to back down. One way or another, he was going to protect his lake. He woke up one Saturday morning with his decision already made. For too long, he'd watched his private lake turn into a noisy playground for people who didn't care about him or his property. For too long, he had tried to be polite and patient, hoping Karen would understand or at least respect his words. But nothing had changed. If anything, things had gotten worse. The final straw had been just a few days earlier, when he came home late from work and found trash bags left on the grass, empty bottles floating in the water, and muddy footprints all along the edge of the lake. It broke his heart to see the place he loved treated that way. He told himself that if he didn't act now, he would lose everything that made the lake special. So that morning, instead of walking down with his fishing rod like usual, he carried tools in his hands, a new padlock, a heavy chain, and a set of signs he had ordered online. The signs were simple, but strong in their message. They read, "Private property, no trespassing, and violators will be prosecuted." He'd even bought an extra one that said, "Lake access locked, authorized persons only." He felt a strange mix of anger and determination as he carried them to the path leading down to the water. The gate wasn't big or fancy, just a wooden structure marking the entrance to the trail. But it was enough to block the way, if locked properly. He wrapped the heavy chain around it, clicked the padlock into place, and tested it twice to make sure it was secure. Then he placed the signs where no one could miss them, one nailed firmly to the gate, another hammered into the ground at the edge of the path, and one more near the shore. As he stepped back to look at his work, he felt a wave of relief. For the first time since moving in, he felt like he had taken real control of his lake. He spent the next few hours cleaning the area, picked up every piece of trash, filled 2 large garbage bags, and stacked them by his house to be thrown away. He raked the grass where it had been trampled flat, trying to make it look neat again, even checked the water, removing broken glass with a small net to keep the fish safe. When he was done, he stood there in silence, looking at the clean, quiet lake. It felt like the place he had fallen in love with again. For a short while, he even allowed himself to smile, but peace rarely lasts when Karen is involved. The very next morning, he was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking coffee, when he heard the sound of shouting outside. At first, he thought it was just kids playing in the street, but then the voices grew louder and angrier. He opened the window and instantly recognized the shrill voice that made his stomach twist. It was Karen. He walked out to the yard. Sure enough, Karen was standing at the locked gate, her 2 kids tugging at the chain while she yelled. She was dressed in her usual oversized sun hat and big sunglasses, as if she were at some beach resort rather than someone else's property. When she saw him, she waved her arms dramatically. "What is this?" she screamed, rattling the gate with both hands. "Do you think you're doing, locking up the lake?" He kept his steps calm and steady, even though inside he was boiling with nerves. "I told you before," he said firmly. "This is my property. You can't just come here whenever you want. I put up signs and locked the gate so there's no confusion anymore." Karen's face turned red as she pointed at him. "You can't do this. This is against HOA rules. The lake belongs to the community, and you don't get to lock it up like some kind of prison." He shook his head, holding back the urge to shout. "I've read the HOA rules. I've read my deed. This lake belongs to me, not the HOA, not the community. If you want to see proof, I'll show you again. But either way, you can't keep coming here. You're trespassing." Her kids stood behind her, looking confused, whispering to each other. But Karen wasn't backing down. She rattled the gate again, making the chain clink loudly. "You think you're smart, don't you? Putting up signs, locking gates. Who do you think you are? You're new here. You don't make the rules. We've been using this lake long before you showed up, and no piece of paper is going to change that." He clenched his jaw. He had expected her to be angry, but the sheer arrogance still surprised him. He kept his voice steady, though his hands were shaking slightly at his sides. "I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm protecting my property. If you break this lock, if you tear down these signs, or if you step past this gate, I'll have no choice but to call the police. I don't want to do that, but I will if I have to." For a moment, Karen just stared at him, as if she couldn't believe he had actually said that. Then she burst out laughing, a high, mocking laugh that made his blood boil. "Police? You think the police are going to take your side? This will be good. I'll call them myself and tell them you're stealing community land. We'll see how fast they make you unlock this gate." She turned on her heel, dragging her kids with her, and stormed off down the street. He stood there by the gate, his heart pounding, watching her go. He knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things drop. She would come back, louder and angrier than before. But as he looked at the lock and the signs, he felt a surge of pride. At least now the rules were clear. There could be no more excuses, no more pretending she didn't understand. The lake was his, and he had made that visible to everyone. Over the next few days, the neighborhood grew strangely tense. He noticed people looking at him when he walked to his mailbox. Some gave polite nods, while others whispered to each other. As he passed, he figured Karen had already started spreading her version of the story, telling anyone who would listen that he had stolen the lake from everyone. It didn't surprise him. She loved being the center of attention, and drama was her favorite weapon. But he also noticed something else. The lake stayed quiet. No more kids splashing, no more dogs running wild, no more strangers leaving garbage behind. For the first time since he moved in, the water reflected the sky undisturbed. and the air around it carried only the sounds of birds and wind. Every evening when he walked down to sit by the shore, he felt like he had taken a piece of his life back. It gave him strength to face whatever storm Karen was planning next. He didn't have to wait long. One afternoon, as he sat in his living room, he heard the sharp sound of a car door slamming outside. He peeked through the blinds and saw Karen standing in front of his gate again, this time without her kids. She had her phone in her hand, her finger pointing directly at the lock. She was pacing back and forth, speaking loudly into the phone. Her words carried on the wind. He couldn't hear every detail, but one phrase rang clear. "Yes, officer. I need you to come. He's blocking community access. He's breaking the law." His stomach tightened, but he didn't panic. He had been expecting this. He walked to his desk, picked up the folder with his property documents, and set it on the table by the door. If the police were really coming, he would be ready. For now. All he could do was sit quietly and wait, his eyes on the calm, locked lake, knowing that his fight to protect it was only just beginning. The sound of sirens in the distance made his chest tighten. He had been waiting for this moment ever since Karen stormed off with her threats. Now it was happening. He looked out the window and saw the flashing lights creeping slowly down the neighborhood street until they stopped right in front of his gate. Two police officers stepped out of their car, adjusting their belts and radios. Moving with the calm authority of men who had done this many times before. Karen was already there, standing like a queen, waiting for her soldiers. She waved her arms, wildly pointing at the gate and shouting before the officers even reached her, "This man has locked up community property. He's stealing from all of us. You have to make him open this gate right now." Her voice was loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, and sure enough, a few curious neighbors were peeking from their porches and windows. Whispering among themselves, he took a deep breath, grabbed his folder of documents from the table, and stepped outside. His hands were steady even though his heart was racing. This was the moment that would decide everything. Either the officers would believe Karen's story and side with her, or they would see the truth written clearly in his papers. One of the officers held up his hand to calm Karen, who was practically bouncing with anger. "Ma'am, let us handle this," he said firmly. She folded her arms and huffed, but kept glaring at him as if daring him to deny her. The other officer turned toward him. "Hey, sir, can you explain what's going on here? Your neighbor claims this lake is community property and that you've locked everyone out." He nodded politely, keeping his voice as calm as he could. "Yes, officer, I can explain everything. This lake is not community property. It is part of my private property. I purchased this home earlier this year, and the lake is included in the deed. I've had repeated problems with people trespassing, so I put up signs and a lock on the gate. I'm happy to show you proof." He opened his folder and handed over the neatly stacked papers. The officer took them and began reading carefully, scanning the highlighted sections he had prepared in advance. The silence felt heavy as Karen tapped her foot impatiently behind the officer, muttering under her breath. Finally, Karen couldn't hold back. She shouted, "Don't believe him. That's fake paperwork. The HOA rules say that the lake belongs to everyone. He can't just claim it for himself." The officer looked up at her with a steady gaze. "Ma'am, do you have any proof of what you're saying? Is any document showing that this lake is community property?" Karen froze for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like she had been caught off guard. "Well, no, but everyone knows it. We've always used it. The last owner let us. That means it's community property." The second officer shook his head slowly. "That's not how property ownership works. Just because someone let you use their land doesn't make it public. If the deed says this man owns it, then it belongs to him." Karen's face flushed bright red. She pointed at him again, shouting, "Louder? You don't understand. He's lying. He's selfish, rude, and trying to control the whole neighborhood. You can't let him get away with this." The first officer held up his hand again, his tone sharper now. "Ma'am, enough. I've seen the deed and it's very clear. This lake is private property. You have no legal right to be here without his permission. If you continue to trespass, you can and will be charged. Do you understand?" Hit Karen like a slap. She stood there, speechless for once, her jaw tight as her sunglasses slipped down her nose. The neighbors watching from their porches whispered louder now, some of them shaking their heads at her. She had been so confident, so loud, but now she looked small and cornered. He almost felt sorry for her, but only for a second. Mostly he felt relief, a heavy weight lifting off his shoulders. The law was on his side, and now everyone knew it. The officer handed back his papers and gave him a nod. "You've done everything right, sir. You put up signs, you locked the gate, and you have the legal documents to back it up. If she or anyone else ignores that and enters your property again, call us immediately. We'll take care of it." Nodded, his voice steady. "Thank you, officers. I just wanted some peace. I've worked hard for this property and I only want to enjoy it without conflict." The officer gave him a reassuring look. "You're entitled to that. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Karen, meanwhile, was fuming. She stomped her foot like a child, denied candy, muttering angrily under her breath. "This isn't fair. It's not fair. It's supposed to be for everyone." She turned to the officers again, desperation in her voice. "You don't understand. He's ruining this neighborhood. He's not one of us. He thinks he's better than everyone." The second officer crossed his arms. "Ma'am, this isn't about fairness. This is about the law. If you set foot on his property again without his permission, you'll be trespassing. And if we have to come back here for the same issue, we won't just give warnings. Do you understand?" Karen's face twisted with frustration. She wanted to argue more, but the authority in the officer's voice stopped her. She clenched her fists, spun around, and marched down the street, her angry muttering fading with every step. The neighborhood felt strangely quiet after she left. The officers gave him one last nod before returning to their car. As they drove away, the flashing lights disappeared, leaving only the calm reflection of the lake behind the locked gate. He stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. The fight that had been building for weeks had finally reached its peak, and he had won. Not by shouting louder than Karen, not by playing her games, but by standing firm with the truth. The papers in his hands felt heavier than gold, proof that patience and persistence mattered more than noise and arrogance. Later that evening, he walked down to the water with a chair and sat quietly as the sun dipped below the trees. The lake shimmered with orange and gold, peaceful and undisturbed. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly calm. The fear that Karen would take everything away was gone. The law had spoken. And now, the whole neighborhood knew the truth. But he also knew Karen. She wasn't the type to admit defeat, not even when the facts were undeniable. She might avoid him for a while, but deep down, he suspected she was already planning her next move. For now, though, he allowed himself to enjoy the victory. The lake was his sanctuary again, and nothing, not Karen, not her lies, not even her shouting, could take that away. The crickets began to sing as night settled over the water. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the gentle sounds of nature. The fight had been worth it. His lake was safe. For now, the world was quiet again. After that day with the police, the air around the neighborhood felt different. It was as if a line had been drawn that no one could erase. Karen had been loud, dramatic, and absolutely certain she would win, but the officers had made it clear she was wrong. The lake was private, the papers were real, and trespassing would not be tolerated. Still, even with the law on his side, he could not relax completely. He knew people like Karen. She was not the type to admit defeat gracefully. She would never walk up to him and apologize. That wasn't in her nature. But at least for now, she had no choice but to stay away. In the first few days after the confrontation, he noticed how quiet the lake became. For weeks it had been filled with shouts, laughter, barking dogs, and splashing water. But now it was still again, like it had been the first time he saw it. When he stepped out in the mornings with his coffee, the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the gentle calls of birds. Ducks glided smoothly across the surface, fish jumped up now and then, and the water reflected the sky like a perfect mirror. It reminded him of why he had fallen in love with this place in the first place. The neighbors reacted in different ways. Some avoided him, probably because Karen had already filled their ears with her version of the story. He saw curtains move when he walked past, and sometimes he caught snippets of whispered conversations when people thought he wasn't listening. Others, however, gave him polite nods, or even small smiles. A few of them quietly told him he had done the right thing. "We knew that woman was trouble," one older neighbor said in a low voice. "She thinks she owns this whole street. Good for you for standing up to her."
Yeah.
Those small words gave him comfort. At least not everyone believed Karen's lies. Karen herself became strangely quiet. She no longer stormed down the path with her children or guests. She didn't rattle the gate or leave trash behind. Instead, she pretended he didn't exist. Whenever he saw her walking her dog, she turned her head the other way, refusing to make eye contact. It was almost funny to him, watching her stomp past with stiff shoulders, trying to act as if nothing had happened. Her silence was her defeat, even if she would never admit it. For him, life slowly returned to normal. He spent more time by the lake, fishing in the evenings, or just sitting on the grass with a book. Sometimes he built a small fire in the pit he had made, roasting marshmallows and listening to the quiet crackle of flames. The peace he had dreamed of was finally his, and he guarded it carefully. He never forgot how close he had come to losing it. Every time he saw the private property sign and the locked gate, he felt a little surge of pride. He had taken action, and it had worked. But peace had a strange flavor now. It wasn't just calmness. It was also strength. He knew now that he could stand up for himself, even against someone as loud and stubborn as Karen. He had been afraid at first, worried that the neighborhood would turn against him, worried that the police might not believe him. But when the moment came, he had stayed calm, presented the truth, and won. That lesson stayed with him. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about life. The neighborhood gossip faded with time. People moved on to other stories, other dramas. The locked gate became a normal sight, no longer shocking or strange. The kids who once splashed in the water found other places to play. Slowly it became clear that the lake was his in everyone's mind, as well as on paper. The battle that had seemed so exhausting now felt like a distant memory. Still, there were moments when he thought about Karen. He could picture her in her house, complaining to her friends, telling anyone who would listen about the selfish man who stole the lake. He imagined her sitting by her window, staring at the locked gate with frustration burning in her chest. But she never said a word to him again. Maybe the warning from the police had been enough to scare her, or maybe she realized she could not win this fight. Either way, she kept her distance, and that was good enough for him. One evening, as the sun was setting and the lake glowed golden in the fading light, he reflected on everything that had happened. Shouting, the threats, the trash, the police cars, none of it seemed real anymore. What felt real was the cool breeze against his face, the soft ripples on the water, and the knowledge that this place was truly his. He felt proud, not just of owning the property, but of protecting it. It was a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight is uncomfortable, even if it makes enemies. Life in the neighborhood eventually settled into a rhythm. Karen stayed in her lane. The other neighbors grew used to the new normal, and he carried on with his days. Sometimes when he saw children riding bikes past his house or families walking together in the evening, he wondered if they thought of him as strict or unfriendly. But then he reminded himself of the truth. He had been more than fair. He had asked politely, explained patiently, and even tolerated more than he should have. It was only when his kindness was abused that he finally acted. There was no shame. In that, seasons changed, and the lake reflected each one beautifully. In summer, it sparkled like glass under the hot sun. In autumn, the trees around it turned orange and red, their colors painting the water in fiery shades. In winter, frost edged the surface in delicate patterns, and the air felt sharp and still. In spring, the grass grew lush and green again, and new life appeared everywhere. Each season reminded him that the lake was more than property. It was a gift, one he had promised himself to protect. The memory of Karen shouting still echoed sometimes in his mind, but now it only made him smile. He could picture her face, red with anger, when the police told her she was wrong. We could hear her muttering about fairness as she stomped away. It was almost amusing now, like a story he would tell friends one day. What once felt like a nightmare. now felt like proof that he had done the right thing. In the end, Karen lost more than just access to the lake. She lost her power. For years, she had bullied and controlled people in the neighborhood with her loud voice and false authority. But when she tried it with him, it backfired. Everyone had seen her humiliated by the law. Everyone had seen her storm away in defeat. She would never have the same influence again. He, on the other hand, gained something valuable. It's not just peace, not just quiet evenings by the water, but confidence. He learned that he didn't have to bow down to people who shouted the loudest. He learned that the truth, backed by patience and proof, was stronger than arrogance. Most of all, he learned that protecting what you love is always worth the effort. No matter how much noise it causes along the way, the lake became his sanctuary again, safe behind its locked gate, untouched by careless hands. And though Karen never apologized, her silence was apology enough. She stayed out of his way, and that was victory in itself. He had fought for his dream, and he had won.